we have looked at a couple of binding methods, flexible binding and region binding, and we've also looked at layer binding. In order of appearance, the flexible and regional binding gives you very broad control over an object. Everything is kind of connected together and rubbery. When you go to layer binding, you control movement very specifically, and in fact, you're controlling rotation more than you're controlling anything else. Now we're going to get to the fine-tuning binding, and that happens to be point binding. This is really important and used when you're working with garments or something like that, where you need to have certain things work just perfectly when the bone bends. So what I've done is created a real basic character right here to go ahead and explore some of this. Currently, I have got the top layer selected, and the bones are just as they are created. If I grab the tool right up here in the upper left-hand corner to go ahead and manipulate the bones, we see that we get a lot of motion going on. The character's head kind of stretches out. Not ideal. So what we want to do is stop that. Now your first instinct might be to go to the layer setting here for the bones, double click on it, and change this instead to region binding. If you do that, we get a different orientation of the bone strength around here. And when I click on this layer and move it, well, that looks okay. But here's what I don't like about this. There's some interactivity between this side of the collar and the one on the other side of the shirt. And I don't like that. I want more control over that. And when I move this one, while it doesn't distort the head anymore, I still want better control. So let me undo that. To do this, we need to go ahead and go into point binding mode. And the way you do that, like layer binding, is to select individual layers underneath a bone layer. So to begin with, we'll start with the shirt collar. Now I already have a bone selected here. If I didn't do that, I would need to come and use the bone selection tool to highlight this, and then I would come to the point binding tool right here. When I click this, we can see some of the points, a little hard to see right now, around this collar. When this particular bone is used, I want it to select all the bones on this side with the collar. Now they've turned red. Very important step right here. You either need to push the space bar, which is a legacy treatment, or come up here and push the button that says bind points. If you don't do that, it won't work. The next thing we'll do is come to the shirt. I want only these points to be affected when I go ahead and move this one particular bone. Bind points. And finally on the neck, I'll grab all the points right there and bind these. Now, for this next bone, I can go ahead and repeat this process, but choose different points. So I'm going to go ahead and select the bone out here on the edge. Come back to my Bind Points tool. Now the neck is selected. The only points I want to move when this particular bone is manipulated are the ones right here at the end. I'll bind those. We come to the shirt. I only want these to move. Better bind that. And finally, the shirt collar, I only want these two on the end. And I'll bind those. We'll come to the very top level now, point binding, and grab the bone manipulation tool over on the left. And I still have these strength areas here. This is where you can really finesse how the rig works. And again, we'll get in more detail when we cover the rig in a separate section. But when I grab this right now, and move it, we can see that the motion now has been confined to just the points we selected. If I don't want it this significant right here, see I'm still getting a little bit of movement right over here, then I can come to my bone strength tool for this bone and dial it down. And I can do the same thing right here. Come back to my bone manipulation tool, and now we still get some movement there, but it's being much more controlled. So if I want my character to shrug, I can go ahead and get that type of motion in there with no distortion to the head, no distortion over here that we would have with region or flexi binding. So again, point binding gives you really precise control over your drawn elements in your scene. Only works with vector objects. You can't use point binding for any imported pictures like you can with layer binding. So know that that's out there.